Okay, this is chapter 4. We'll try to get through this as fast as we can. And then we will be discussing designing lessons and developing curriculum with technology. So it's going to be prevalent to what we'll be talking about the rest of the semester as far as designing lessons. We're going to talk about um, the research and science of learning. So that's going to be more philosophies, and then the process of lesson design. We'll look at a understanding by design approach, which is just one of the many approaches that we can use to talk about learning objectives, and then performance approaches regarding assessment. So you should focus on what pivotal ideas from research on the science of learning the teachers need to know, and that's going to be an educational philosophy, and then lesson design, delivery, and assessment. I put this up there, let us teach, let them learn, because we'll talk about all kinds of standardized testing and Common Core and things like that. The other questions are, what are student learning objectives, and this UBD approach, which again is just one approach, and how can technology assist in all this stuff. So I put this picture up. This is a really famous cartoon, actually, and it's, for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Well, not everybody's going to be able to climb the tree, and that's something that sometimes administrators in education fail to realize. So, and it could be sticky. So we'll talk about that. So the first philosophy we'll talk about is constructivism. Okay, and it's how students learn based on what they already know or their prior knowledge. So I'll put as far as gaining prior knowledge, but we try to get the students all on the same page. So we'll ask them. This is a very, very simplistic example, but what color are trees? Well, everybody knows they're green, but based on experiences and their prior knowledge, we have set a baseline or a standard. Again, that's very simplistic. I have a little bit more deeper one that I'll show you in a small video, a vignette that I'll post. It says learning is an active, dynamic process of interaction with other people and instructional methods. So that's kind of where we get the social constructivism. So we are collaborating using communication to do our teaching. There's several different ways to do this. We do it through active learning, metacognitive thinking, meaning, cognitive just means, using your brain to do it. Active learning is more about, or it can be hands-on, tactile learning. Again, we're working with a pre-existing knowledge and understanding of the student, and teach subject matter with a variety of examples and models for each concept. And then again, use the brain. Okay, so constructivism is really based on three different philosophies. The one that we have been using up to about the 60s was behaviorism, and that's teacher-centered. Teacher's a source of the knowledge. Teacher lectures to the student. They take some type of assessment, generally a test or a quiz, and that's it. Everything is measurable. Again, it's called drill and practice. And there's no negotiation. Teacher talks, students may or may not write notes or whatnot, and then they take some type of assessment. That's it. In constructivism, teaching is more facilitated as a collaboration between the students, but it's really, we're letting the students ask more questions. We're doing a couple different things. We're maybe doing some authentic assessments like portfolios or some type of PowerPoint presentation or something like that. And then with constructivism, we're really trying to see the students individually and trying to teach to their individual taste, but we try to get them all on the same page through prior knowledge. And then we have a platform that we build upon. It's called scaffolding. So we use the 3 R's: critical thinking, communication, creativity, in addition to, and communication, in addition to the 3 R's. That's what we're trying to do here. Piaget and Dewey were the fathers of constructivism, but there were 2 other very important people that were also prevalent in this constructivist movement. One, rather, his name was Booker T. Washington, and he was a pragmatist, meaning practical learning. So practical that he had the students actually building the buildings on the campus. He had a lot of debates with a guy named W.D. Du Bois, who was more of a behaviorist, cognitivist. There had many debates around the country, and that's a good research project if you ever need an idea for a research project in another class. The Washington Du Bois debates is a really good subject. Whoops, hello. So we have teacher-centered and learner-centered. So again, teacher-centered is really transmission teaching. The teacher is the sender, the student is the receiver, and that's it. It's viewed as a set of discrete, fixed facts. And it's really the teacher's goal to find the most efficient way to convey the information to the students, but it's usually through lecture. It could be through other means. They might use some type of audio-visual show a movie or something like that, but it's generally lecture. Learner-centered, which is on the next page here. Student-centered approaches are different than this, but these are characteristics of learner-centered experiences, and that's reflective learning, which is what I do with you guys. You won't write research papers in this class. You do all reflective work. So whatever I give you, you need to reflect on it. Tell me what you think. It makes it more personal. For this class, there's really no collaboration, although there will be at one point in time when we do one of our final projects. It could be authentic, productive, modeling, inquiring, all these types of things, other than this really stagnant transmission teaching that is teacher-centered. It makes students active participants in all elements of the classroom lessons. Now, I have a problem with this word "all." It's a small word, but it's got a lot of meaning. We can't have students be active in all elements of the classroom lessons. We have to have some boundaries, but they are definitely more active in the elements. Teachers create curriculum rather than simply delivering it, and that's a issue because sometimes the school system or the state requires that teachers use a specific curriculum. So they won't be creating their curriculum. They'll be using what I call a canned curriculum given to them by the county, by the school system itself, or by the state, generally not the federal government, but and those are generally standards-based tests. You've all probably taken standardized testing in your high school, actually your K through 12 careers. You've probably taken a lot of standardized tests, and a lot of those are canned curriculum. So if you recall the first picture, let us teach. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we're really looking to find learning that can create situations that lead to problem solving, creative problem solving, and thoughtful reflection, and critical thinking. Okay. This is 4 basic ways to actively engage students, but there's a lot more. One-on-one tutoring, learning groups, so you have collaboration and communication in there, inquiry-based learning, looking at the analytical skills, looking at creativity and critical thinking, along with metacognitive thinking as well. There's those 2 things. So all these things can help with this to engage students. High Tech High is a high school in San Diego, and it looks at the active learning constructivist approach. Each of the students have personalized curriculum for them. They try to get them connected to the adult world in their learning, and it does have a common intellectual mission, but it really focuses on the 4 C's: collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking. If you click on this in the PowerPoint, it will take you to the High School High website. I'm not going to do that now, but you should check that out on your own. Lesson development. Well, I've always said there's 4 aspects to any lesson, and it's simply, what do you want to do, how are you going to do it, how do you know they learned, and then you need to reflect, how are you going to make it better, because very rarely do any lessons go completely fine. They often all have some flaw or some tweaking that needs to be done. So this is the lesson development model, and they're using the understand by design method, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is basically what we want to do in the lesson. But these are the 3 critical decisions, and we actually have a 4th one that they don't mention, and that's reflection, teacher reflection. So with what to teach, how do we come up with things to do in our lesson? Well, we're going to have a content area, obviously, math, science, history, physical education, whatever. So we're going to be teaching something in our content area, our subject area, but we may have to come up with units and lessons. And one of the places you will go is CPALMS, and that'll be your 3rd extra credit. Is signing up for CPALMS, where it says here, it'll say you're a member. But I'll have a whole video on that in a week or so, probably 2 weeks, of how to do that extra credit. But CPALMS is by the state of Florida, Department of Education. It has toolkits, lesson plans, unit plans for everything you can think of that's in K through 12. The resources get smaller the more out you go. So when I asked you to do your lesson plan decision, I asked you to stay within the realms of the basic 3: reading, writing, arithmetic, and all those types of things. Because the resources get smaller and smaller, and I'll show you that. But you can get in here, you can get lesson plans, you can get all kinds of stuff, and it's free. And you can do whatever you want with it. It's not plagiarizing, it's not anything. It's there for you as a teacher, for you to use. So this can help you get a lot of ideas with academic content and what to teach. And you can make everything your own. How to teach, we have goals, methods, procedures, and they all need to be put in the lesson plan. Now this is just a template, generalized template, and we'll have some of this stuff on our lesson plan template. But these are basically what we're going on. The big thing we're going to look at is objectives and goals. What's the difference between a goal and an objective? We'll talk about that a little bit later here in this lecture. So Uh, all this stuff has to be looked at when we are writing a lesson, and that's one of the reasons you're in this class. Is we're going to key in on all three of these things, but how we can use technology to help us do it. And then assessment. How do we know that what they've done? Okay, so we have three different types of unit and lesson plan assessments. Diagnostics, what are we going to do prior to actually teaching the lesson? If you ever took a bell ringer in school, and many of you have, a lot of times they would use that as a diagnostic to measure the student's knowledge ahead of a lesson. Formative and summative. I took a whole class at Ohio State in grad school on formative and summative assessment. It was a major snore fest. However, it taught me a lot of things, but basically, if we're teaching a unit on moon phases, for example, the subject is science, the unit is earth space science, and the lessons, or the unit's going to be on a solar system, and the lesson's going to be on moon phases. Well, we may have 2 or 3 lessons. We may not be able to teach that in a 50-minute period. So we may have 2 or 3 lessons about that. So formative assessment looks at the daily lessons. So we have 3 lessons. We're going to look at each day of those 3 days and make, reflect on it, what went well, what didn't go well, how we can tweak it a little bit. Second day, third day, the same thing. So that's called formative assessment as far as lesson plans go. Summative assessment at the end of the lessons or the end of the unit, we'll actually take a look at all the notes and we'll make, we'll write down what we need to do when we do this whole unit again. So we're summarizing what happened. It's a very simple concept. So again, objectives. Again, learning objectives tell who is going to do what, when, and how much or how often, and how it will be measured or evaluated. These 2 words are critical here because we may have a goal. The goal is we want students to understand the phases of the moon. Okay, that's a great goal, but we can't measure that. We can't measure we want them to understand or we want them to gain knowledge. That's our goal. In order for us to measure it, we have to use an objective. And you've all seen objectives and syllabi that you've had throughout the years that says by the end of this course, the student will be able to do A, B, C. And those usually have what I call these keywords in it. So if we want students to do any of these things, we want them to understand. We're going to have them classify something. So we talk about moon phases, classify the different moon phases, describe them, discuss, explain, identify. If we write that as an objective, students will describe in a worksheet how the moon phases work. Well, we can measure that. We can give them a grade on that. We can't just say because the goal is we want the students to understand that. We can't measure that. How do we know they understood? We have to use this stuff. So this is Bloom's taxonomy, and it seems to people who first see it as a big giant deal. It's really not. It sets up everything for you. So whatever you want your students to do, you can write really good objectives by just using these words. But you have to create, you have to design what you want them to do. So we'll have more about that as we go along. So the understanding by design model, I'm going to let you read about that in your book, but this graphic right here, traditionally we would actually write lessons and then hopefully they will align to standards in the core curriculum. But when we do this UBD thing, we already know what the standards are in the core curriculums and what's expected of us to teach, for us to teach the students. So we understand that going in, then we can plan, and then we can develop cool activities. Okay, Common Core standards. Well, again, we're standards based these days in our schools, and Common Core is one of them. We have all types of different state standards, local standards that we have to deal with, and the concept of Common Core was a good concept. That's a bad sentence, but conceptually it was a good concept. And that was that across the country, if you lived in Florida, in Tallahassee, Florida, and you were going to move to Spokane, Washington, as a fifth grader, you would basically have the same understanding as a fifth grader in Florida as you would in Washington State. And they did that through standardized testing. Um, it's more rigorous. It's got aligned assignments that are going to be aligned across state bounds. It's internationally benchmarked, meaning we're competing with the world. Um, it incorporates the latest research on how to do it. Well, sort of, yeah, kind of. The opponents say it's way too dominant in the testing. We're testing more to the test and not actually teaching the students. There's an inappropriate federal role in education, meaning the states should control their own education, not the federal government. There's no local control of multiple purposes of education, and it's also business exploitation. And what that means is there was the people that were running this at the federal level was a group of 6 people, and out of these 6 people, 3 of them were from Pearson Publishing, who happens to sell textbooks. So that got some eyebrows raised. But the biggest part was, out of all 6 people, they only had a year and a half of actual K through 12 teaching. So that raised some eyebrows. It got more. It's getting more and more to these A, B, and C scored schools and funding and so forth and so on. So it's a little bit of a mess, and it's actually starting to come around now. Now, not all states even participated in it. The state of Florida does not participate in Common Core standards. One of the reasons is it was brought out through a Democratic federal government, and Florida, the governor at that time was Republican, still is, I guess, didn't want federal aid from a Democratic federal government, so they made their own. So there's a few states that did that. Florida was one, Texas, and a few other. The rest did Common Core and are currently doing Common Core. I'm going to get off my soapbox on this. There's a lot of different ways teachers view assessment and testing and so forth, and it's, a lot of teachers tend to teach and test the way they were taught and tested, and that can be problematic because you're pigeonholing yourself if you do that. We like our students here at Florida A&M University, our teacher education graduates, to spread their wings. We generally will give you a myriad of different ways to do that. So you're not just teaching the way you were taught and tested. You're able to critically think of different ways to do stuff. But you want to do what works for you. That's the bottom line. We have this standardized testing issue that is majorly going on, and again, the graphic here is this is a test us for the test to see if we're ready for the test. So we're working more about teaching to a test than actual content. But I see students who have gone through this. They've been standardized tests since, kindergarten. And I see, doing pretty well in college. So it's not hurting that much, but I often wonder, what would it be like if they didn't have a test and we taught a different way. I'm wondering if more creativity would be brought out of these students or not. But I guess that's some research that needs to be done. Same thing here. New teachers could be unaware or unsure about how to incorporate assessment into teaching. Well, you won't have that issue here at Florida A&M. We will teach you all that, not in this class, but we will teach you how to incorporate assessment into teaching and different types of assessments for when you design. But I love these graphics because we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and it doesn't always work. We got to cram, and it's really hard, not only on the teachers but the student. This testing could be this, the learning is that. It's a fine line between these two, and we're actually getting better though. Norm reference test and criterion reference test. Again, norm reference test compares student performance against their peers, and criterion reference test really looks at the individual. There are critics of the norm reference test because we're looking at not only students here in America, but we're looking at students abroad. And we see Asian countries, China, Korea, Japan, and other Middle Eastern countries. We see it all the time. Their math and science scores are way better than in America. Well, the thing is with that a lot of people don't understand is that in those countries, after middle school's over, they look at what the student does. They do a norm-based or norm and criterion reference based test, and they see where the student's at. And if they're not in a certain percentile, top 30 or something like that, they do not move on to high school. They go to work. So these countries' high schools only have the cream of the crop of their kids as far as intellect goes. So their scores are way up compared to us in America. A lot of people don't understand that. They don't let students continue. They don't have a high dropout rate. We have a tremendously high dropout rate in this country. It's up to 50% in a lot of states. But we collect data of the students who are dropped out early. The data that they did up to the point that they dropped out is in the data assessments, and compared to other countries, yeah, it looks bad for us. However, we have good students. The fact that you're in college, you're a shining example of why we do what we do. And another reason why a lot of these students who in these foreign countries want to come to America to get a higher education, okay, and jobs. I'll get off that soapbox. The standards-based assessments, again, test based on national and state and local standards. So we'll talk a lot about this as we move on. And I'm just going to let you read about this because we are going to do a lot more looking into standards as we move on. Performance assessments. I love this graph. Blurting out facts. Kids write stuff down, then they take a test. Authentic teaching and things of that nature. I mean, the teacher's actually out there doing it, not just talking about it. So, educational activities other than tests offer tangible, practical evidence of knowledge and skills, and this is a textbook example of that. Okay, there's another graph you can read. Bottom line here is preparing our students for life outside school. These 21st century skills that we keep talking about. I believe that's it. So, I'm gonna get that video up that I told you I would do, and may not be up today. This is Wednesday, the 25th, but it will be up soon. Thank you.